Okay, folks, we know some people are going to be continue to be coming into the chat as they join us, but we'll make a start not to hold everybody else back. So, good afternoon, everybody, or morning or evening, wherever you're watching from. My name is Fintan Mullen. I'm the director of the foundation, and it's gives me great pleasure to introduce today our research director, Dr. William Rolston. William has been with the organisation just 2 years less than I have. He joined in 1997 and been research director, William, since 2003. Is that right?
Six.
Six.
hmm
Okay. He's also the author of many very important research guides. I'm going to come back to a couple of them at the end because those guides include very useful information about the subject William is talking on today. So you're here to hear William, not me. I'll stop and pass over to William, and we're going to be listening on a presentation about researching your immigrant ancestors in Irish records. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much, Fintan, and thank you to everyone who has joined today. It's great that so many of you have joined us, and I'm looking forward to speaking to you this afternoon. I'm coming from the County Antrim countryside. The weather here is at present dry and sunny, but it is cold. But it's good to see a bit of sunshine all the same. Now, this talk is going to be looking at how to find out more about your immigrant ancestors in Irish records. So, some of what I'm going to be saying will be applicable to some of you. Maybe some of what I say will be applicable to all of you. But what I hope is that I'm going to be giving some pointers, some clues and ideas and suggestions for things that you could look at that will help you understand more about the processes by which your ancestor left Ireland. I mean, the key questions, of course, are who, why, what, how, and where. Um, it may well be the case that you have information on when your ancestor arrived in a port across the Atlantic or across the Irish Sea or in the Southern Hemisphere, but it may be that you don't have that information. And so you're depending on maybe a clue found in an Irish record that can help you understand more. Now, I'm not going to be going into so much detail about the actual sources themselves. If you want to get to grips, say, particularly with sources from the 19th century, I'd refer you to the talk that I gave a few weeks ago, which is available on YouTube. So if you go to our YouTube channel, if you go to YouTube and look up Ulster Historical Foundation, you can find my talk, What Makes the 19th Century Different? And in that talk, I looked at 20 different aspects of Irish records for the period between 1800 and 1900, and looking at those records and helping you to understand more about, well, what records are available? What are the big changes in record keeping in the course of the 19th century, and what are the results of that? So if you want more about the actual records, then certainly go to uh, the YouTube, the Foundation's YouTube channel, and check out my talk on what makes the 19th century different. Now, as many researchers will be aware, it's not until the end of the 19th century that we actually have passenger lists centrally kept, recording people leaving these islands, Britain and Ireland. These records only start in 1890. They're found with the Board of Trade Records that are in the National Archives at Kew and London. And they've been indexed and digitized. They're now available through Find My Past. They can also be accessed on ancestry.com. So those records are available, but they only begin in 1890. So then, before 1890, what records are there in Irish archives that can help you find out more about your Irish ancestors and when they perhaps left the shores? Well, there are some passenger lists emanating from an Irish source. From the very start of the 19th century, there are lists of several thousand names of passengers found among the Hardwick papers in the British Library in London. So there was a, a concerted effort between 1803 and 1806 to actually record the names of passengers leaving through Irish ports for, well, America principally, or wherever it might have been. Those names have been transcribed and published in a book edited by Brian Mitchell, our colleague in Dairy Genealogy, and that's available through Genealogical Publishing. Brian is also the editor of Irish Passenger Lists 1847 to 1871. And this uh, records the names of passengers found in the records of two companies based in the port of Derry, J&J Cook and the McCorkle line. And J&J Cook, both companies, many passengers sailed from the port of Derry on ships either owned or chartered by those companies in that period, in that time period. So even in 1847, something like 5,000 passengers left through the port of Derry on ships either owned or chartered by J&J Cook. The information includes the name of the passenger, very often the age, especially in the case of children, and also where the passenger came from. Now, it must be said that the records for the McCorkle line tend to be more specific in terms of the place of origin of the passenger. The records for the Cook line are maybe more general, maybe like a local town or village or post town, but still, it's exceptionally useful information. So in some cases, yes, there will be passenger lists emanating from an Irish source, naming those departing these shores. But principally, it's going to be records of arrival in wherever it might be, say North America, rather than records of departure from Ireland, at least prior to 1890. So that's why in this talk I'm trying to look at other places that you can look for information on your ancestors leaving these shores for new life in another part of the world. So first of all, I'm going to begin with church records. Now, we're all aware of the great value of church records from a genealogical perspective. So useful, say, prior to 1864, when we have official records of births and deaths. They're essential building blocks of family history. And you can find within church records occasionally information on immigration. So you may find, for example, on a baptismal record, there may be a note that the family was maybe on their way out of Ireland and they had the child baptized just before they left. There may be a record in, for example, a marriage certificate that might indicate that the father of one of the parties was living in another part of the world as well. This is a very interesting one. This is for Killaloe in County Clare. Killaloe, maybe it should be or Killaloe Parish, County Clare. It's from 1846, and there's an entry there for the baptism of Henry Winnett. And then you can see at the bottom there is a little footnote, and the footnote reads, Henry Winnett and wife from Toronto visiting Ireland were present at church service on Sunday, October the 13th, 1895. At his request, I showed him the entry of his baptism, and at his dictation, filled up the blanks left by Mr. Going in the second, third, and fourth columns. He did not know the date of his baptism. That's signed by the minister, Thomas Vereker. And so there's an instance where the record was actually incomplete in the original register. And because Henry Winnett came back to the parish of his birth, 50 years after he was born, maybe it was a special trip for his 50th birthday, visits a church and he's able to give the records or to fill in the gaps in the records. Now, of course, that's not going to be something you'll come across very often, but nonetheless, it does give you an indication of sometimes what can be found. Now, particularly within Catholic baptismal registers, you will find notations, certainly from the late 19th century onwards, indicating maybe details of when and where and to whom someone married. I mean, all of the churches place a high premium on ensuring that the integrity of marriage and ensuring that people who were qualified to marry were able to marry, and those who were not qualified to marry, perhaps because they were already married, couldn't do so. And so within Catholic records, you'll very often find from the late 19th century onwards annotations indicating where and when someone married. And very often these will involve marriages that took place outside of Ireland. So there is a baptism from 1886 of Dennis Pettigrew. So it gives his name gives the names of his parents, where the family lived, the sponsors, the celebrant, and the fee paid. And then underneath there's a note: married to Anne O'Reilly Murray, widow, and they married in a church in Rockaway Boulevard, Ozone Park in New York. Okay, so in Queens, New York, quite some years later, actually. This is in 1948. Uh, but obviously, inquiries had been made with the parish of his birth, or he had to provide evidence from the parish of his birth that he was indeed free to marry. So if you keep an eye out for Catholic records from the late 19th century onwards, you may very well find details like this, and so can be tremendously useful in any family tree. Now, sometimes within congregational records or parish records, you may find a listing of the members of the parish or congregation, and maybe information on those who had departed from the parish in recent times. So this is one for the parish of Killinane in County Galway. The original of this record is in the Representative Church Body Library in Dublin. That's the official archive of the Church of Ireland. And you can see where within this volume, there are lists of emigrants from the parish. So we have the name of the emigrant, their place of origin, and then notations to indicate where they went. So, for example, we see in this emigrated to America, died 1855 of yellow fever. Somebody else emigrated to America, 1856, and says they came back again. Somebody else went to Australia. Somebody else went to Geelong, Victoria in Australia. Others who went to America. So information like this is so useful because we have the destination, even if it's only, in many cases, simply a country, but we have a destination and a year at least of departure. So church records are so much more than simply baptisms, marriages, and burials. Keep an eye out for the administrative records of the parish, the books of members, maybe visiting books, maybe a record of the minister's visits to the members of his parish, and notations that they made to keep an account of who's still in the parish and who has departed for another part of the world. So in this case, this particular record is in the Representative Church Body Library in Dublin. Other records will be in the likes of the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland or some of the other archives of the religious denominations in Ireland, such as the Methodist Historical Society or Presbyterian Historical Society, or the various Catholic diocesan archives in Ireland as well. Again, likewise, within the Presbyterian Church, you may well find records of people who had left the parish to go elsewhere. So this is one from Portaferry Presbyterian Church in County Down. And we have here removals from Portaferry congregation to Australia. So we have the year, the name of the individual, and their age. And sometimes records like this can be very useful because perhaps a record like this survives where the other records don't. Maybe the baptisms were lost. The earliest records of baptism were lost, and maybe the same for burials. But here we have a record of those who emigrated from the parish to Australia, although further down you can see where it says America as well. So simply a record of those who were leaving the parish, and so many people did over the course of the 19th century. Certainly from Ulster, the province of Ulster alone, the north of Ireland, over 2 million people left the 9 counties of Ulster over the course of the 19th century, as well as maybe 250,000 or so in the 18th century. Again, sometimes even in the most unusual places, you can find little references to emigration. So this is a record of this is the minute book of the Rathfriland Presbyterian Sunday School. And here is an entry and it's from the 1820s. And it's a record of Mr. William Matthews, a teacher in that Sabbath school, who is leaving his native land to go to Australia. And so they wish to present him with something in, acknowledgement of his labours in that particular Sunday school. And so we have a record of the people who subscribed a sum of money towards a gift, a financial gift that would help him on his way. So not the sort of place you would necessarily go to first for information, but it just shows you the value of records like this for highlighting when this William Matthews left Rathfriland. Okay, and keep in mind that the different religious denominations have various tiers of administration. So in the case of the Presbyterian churches, you have the local congregation, which is presided over by the Kirk Session. Then you have the presbytery, which includes representatives of congregations within a geographical area. And then at the top, you have the General Synod, which became the General Assembly in 1840. So here's a record from the Strabane Presbytery minute book from December 1718. 1718 was an auspicious year in immigration, particularly from Ulster. It's really when immigration was speeding up and intensifying. But here we have a record, 1718, where a John Allison has come before the presbytery and he is asking for a testimonial. In other words, a document that would indicate that he was in good standing within the Presbyterian Church. And then he would take that with him to his new home. So his intention is he desires, God willing, to go to America. The presbytery asked him if he desired to go immediately to America. And he said, well, he didn't. So he's obviously just getting things ready, getting things lined up. The presbytery then decided they agree not to allow him a testimonial until he's just about to leave. And it will only be if he is free of all scandal. So he had to continue on his best behaviour before he would actually be issued with this testimonial. But just again highlights potential value of administrative records of the different religious denominations in Ireland for information on immigrants. Okay, civil registration records. Not very often, but sometimes these records can give, again, some vital clues as to when somebody departed these shores. Now, just to summarize very quickly, in 1845, we have the registration of all non-Catholic marriages. That is, marriages conducted in Protestant churches and marriages conducted in registry offices. The background to that is a dispute over whether or not Presbyterian ministers could legally marry a member of the Presbyterian Church and a member of the Church of Ireland, which was the established church at that time. That's why it only applied to Protestant marriages. But from 1864, we have the registration of all marriages, and we have the registration of all births and all deaths. So occasionally within these records, you can find information about immigrants. For example, birth certificates. And I'll show you an example of that later on. Birth certificates name not only the place of birth of the child, but they also name the place of residence of the father. Now, nearly always that's going to be the same, but sometimes the father maybe could have been in America. Sometimes, for example, he could have been on seasonal labour in Scotland. Sometimes he was just maybe living elsewhere and the child was maybe born in the mother's family home, like her parents' home, rather than in the normal residence of the family. But sometimes you can find little clues about where people were living through civil registration records. I mean, I'll show you this example. This is a marriage that took place in the Catholic Church in Limavady in County Londonderry in 1873. Those getting married are William Coyle and Sarah Elder. Both of them are resident in Limavady. And on civil records of marriage, you have the father's name and the father's occupation. So William Coyle is the son of Henry Coyle, a labourer. Sarah Elder is the daughter of James Elder. Now you can see there's a notation that's been made that James Elder went to America, can't say whether alive or not. Okay, so there's an example where contact has been lost with the family member, with the father of Sarah Elder. Communication problems, of course, they just don't know maybe the circumstances in which he left or whatever. But there's a note, he's in America, but we just don't know if he's alive or not. Now, again, briefly, the best way to access civil birth records is through the Irish genealogy website, irishgenealogy.ie. It provides access to all civil records for all of Ireland up to 1921, up to partition, with the exception so far, unless it's changed very recently, exception so far of civil deaths 1864 to 1870. That's the one outstanding gap in the records, but it's a very, very useful source. Now, of course, you can get access to civil records through other websites. For example, Roots Ireland has a very good set of civil birth records and so on. But this would be the first place I would start with in looking for civil records of births, marriages, and deaths. Okay, landed estate papers. Now, I am a big fan of landed estate papers. If you're looking for an ancestor who was from a farming background, look for landed estate papers. Remember that most farmers in Ireland did not own their land outright. Prior to the 19th, in fact, many cases prior to the 20th century, farmers were tenants on an estate. They paid rent for their farm. They didn't own it. It wasn't until the passing of a series of land acts from the late 19th century onwards that we see the massive transfer of land from the ownership of a landed elite into the ownership of the farmers. And that's why landed estate papers, the records generated by the management of these properties, can be so useful in tracing ancestors in the 18th and 19th centuries. And within landed estate papers, you'll find many notations and records and references and even letters that refer to people who had emigrated or were about to emigrate, or assistance given to people who were about to emigrate. So, for example, within landed estate papers, you can find rentals, so records of rent payments. And so we have here a rental for the Werner estate in County Tyrone. And we have a notation here. This is from 1847-48. And a notation about the tenant, the sitting tenant in the townland of Millix in the barony of Clogher. It says, Charles Nimmo went to America. The farm lay waste until November 1848, when one half was let to Robert Henderson as above, and so on. So there's a record with the tenant. This shows the payments, the rent payments made by the tenant. And as you can see, he's paying his rent regularly through these years until we get to 1847. This is at the very height of the famine, although whether he left as a direct consequence of that or not, we just don't know. But there's a note, the tenant of this townland went to America. So there we have the information. If you were, say, looking for Charles Nimmo as your ancestor, maybe that's where you would find when he left these shores. Sometimes you can find printed rentals. So here's one for the Balfour estate in County Fermanagh. This dates from the early 1820s. It was around about the time that the estate was put up for sale. And so the printed rental, I would imagine, was produced as a consequence of that. You can see where it's laid out very neatly. It's very clear, very legible. And you'll see where there are names of lives named, persons named as the lives. I'll talk more just to explain that in a moment, what's the significance of the lives. But in essence, these are individuals who, as long as they were alive, the lease was still valid. And so there's a notation in this rental to indicate were these individuals alive or were they dead? And you can see that in some cases it refers to the fact, well, where were they living? Or where were they rather? What was their status? So for one of the leases, for one of the properties, there's a note. The two John Nobles are dead. Okay. So they're two of the lives, they're deceased. And then there's a note. James Noble went to America a considerable time ago and is supposed to be dead. Okay. So rentals like this can sometimes include really useful information about individuals from the locality and where they've ended up. But what do we mean by lease for lives? Well, a lease for lives was a lease that was issued by the landlord to the tenant. Within that lease, certain individuals were named. And as long as those individuals were still alive, the lease was still valid. The individuals were named, and very often their ages and places of residence were given. The number of lives did vary quite a bit. Sometimes there may be a lease for just one life, but typically for tenant farmers, you had three lives named. So a 3-life lease was very common in the 18th and even in the early 19th century for farmers. Now, farmers often named close family members as the lives. So maybe the farmer himself and two of his children, two of his young children. And as long as at least one of them was still alive, the lease was still valid. Question then is, well, what happens if somebody emigrated? So as I showed you in the case of the Balfour rental, there is a notation that one of the individuals had gone to America many years ago and was supposed to be dead. But was he really dead? If he really was dead, then the lease had expired and the landlord could maybe issue a new lease or a higher rent, for example. So landlords had to do their best to keep track of those named as lives because it had big implications. And it had implications for the farmers as well as to whether or not the leases were still valid. Here's an example of a document in a landed estate collection in County Antrim. It's in the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland. And it's a declaration made before a Justice of the Peace in Philadelphia by two men who had been named as lives in a lease for a farm in the townland of Cross Hill. Okay, so these are Arthur Irwin, who's in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, and William Christie of Philadelphia County, Pennsylvania. And basically them saying that they were both from the parish of Killeed, in which Cross Hill is located, and they were still alive and well, and therefore the lease was valid. So this was drafted in Philadelphia before a Justice of the Peace, was signed by that justice, it was signed by the two individuals, and then that was sent back to Ireland and presented as evidence that the lease was still valid. So again, look out for documents like this, or even other evidence like this within landed estate collections. I mean, again, the best place to look for landed estate papers in Ulster is the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland. You'll also find good collections of estate papers in the likes of the National Library in Dublin, to a lesser extent in the National Archives in Dublin, and in the many county libraries or county museums or county archives across the island of Ireland. And lurking within those collections may be documents like this. Now, lease books can also be extremely useful in looking for your farming ancestors and emigrant ancestors. So a lease book is, you might say, a summary, a volume that contains a summary of the documents for a particular property. So this is for the Downshire estate, the largest estate in County Down, about 70,000 acres in County Down. And this is for the townland of Eden Cullo. And this particular lease book has the name of the tenant, uh, the rent that was paid, the date the lease was issued, other information like that. And then it has information on the status of the lives. Okay, and if I've underlined a few on that particular page I have on the screen. So we have John Walker of Drumlock uh, went to America in 1801. So it says John Morrison died in 1887. Okay, Anne Smith, now the wife of John Walker, late of Drumlock, went to America in 1801. Or we have Jacob Smith in America. Or we have Robert Matthews, went to America many years ago. Or Jacob and Jeremiah Smith in America, the latter heard from lately. Okay, so again, this is, you might say, evidence that he was still alive. He's communicating with us. And sometimes you might see a reference where somebody is saying that they've recently had a letter from so-and-so who'd been named as alive. So landlords had to try and keep a track of the status of the lives in the leases they had issued, because it would have major implications for the validity or otherwise of those leases. So land estate papers offer immense potential in looking for immigrant ancestors. Now, some landlords, especially in the mid-19th century, especially around the time of the famine, did provide assistance to tenants who wished to emigrate. This was seen as being the better option than allowing them to stay on their estates, especially during the famine period when things were so difficult. So the Shirley estate in County Monaghan, a large estate in South County Monaghan, a fabulous collection of records in the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland. And within those records are many papers to do with immigration. So here is a slide showing you a list of people who applied to be sent to Australia in 1849. And so we have the townlands of residence. We have the name of the person who is wishing to go to Australia. And then we have their age. We have the area of their farm or holding, which in most cases is not very big at all. And we have observations about them. Maybe you can see some of those. It says so-and-so's daughter, for instance. So within land estate collections, you can find records where assistance is being given to those wishing to immigrate. And that could be simple, like you might say, financial assistance to help them to buy a ticket for another part of the world, or it could be in-kind assistance, so the provision of food or clothing that they could take with them on their journey outside of Ireland. So again, keep an eye out for records like this within landed estate collections. I mentioned just under the heading of landed estate papers, the Registry of Deeds. Now, Registry of Deeds is a fabulous archive in Dublin. It was founded in 1708 as a repository for documents relating to the transfer of title to land. So it includes a wide range of different documents. So it could be leases, it could be assignments, it could be sales, it could be mortgages, it could be marriage settlements, it could even be wills. So a wonderful archive, and unlike some of the other archives in Ireland, its collections survive intact from 1708 onwards. And especially if you're looking for farming ancestors, this can be a very useful place to conduct research. Now, within the Registry of Deeds, you can find some really, really interesting documents. So this is one that I came across. I've got a summary of it on the next slide. But you can see where I have highlighted a sentence that says, intended going to America. So this is a memorial of an original document found within the Registry of Deeds. Okay, so um, the deed was drawn up in November 1762. It wasn't registered until November 1767, 5 years later. We can only speculate on the reasons for that, but drawn up in November 1762, and there were various parties to it. So, Jane Wilson, a widow, James Mawhinney and his wife Marjorie, née Wilson, and Jane Wilson the younger, all of the townland of Lemnaroy, which is in Termonini parish in County Londonderry. So their first party, and the second party is George Wilson of Ballyriff, which is in Ardtrea parish in the same county. So basically what we have is, in consideration of the sum of £60 paid to them by George Wilson, parties, the first set of parties, the two James Wilsons, the James and Marjorie Mawhinney, leased to George the farm of land in the townland of Lemnaroy that had belonged to Arthur Wilson, who was the older Jane's husband, who had deceased, and it was leased to George for 12 years. And unusually, now this is not common, unusually, it explains why the deed had been drawn up, and explains that the Wilsons and Mawhinneys intended going to America. And they also added a clause to the deed that if they did not return to Ireland at the end of the 12 years or within 2 years of the expiration of the original lease for the farm, then George Wilson, for a further payment of £60, could continue in possession of that farm. So they were, you might say, holding out the prospect, at least keeping their options open in terms of whether or not they would return to Ireland. And interesting, this is a Quaker family who are going out to Delaware. As it discovered, a bit more research discovered they were actually going out because Jane Wilson, the elder's brother, had left her land in Delaware, and that's why they were heading out. But it's interesting that that should actually be specifically mentioned in the deed. Now, you can get access to the Registry of Deeds now through Family Search, familysearch.org. And also, if you're familiar with Family Search, you'll know about how wonderful the full text search facility is on that website. So the Registry of Deeds information has been incorporated within the full text search on Family Search. So certainly check that out. It's a very, very powerful tool for finding out more about your Irish ancestors through the Registry of Deeds, which is an absolutely marvellous archive. Okay, census records, right. Many of you will be aware that although there were censuses in Ireland every 10 years from 1821 in Ireland, that virtually all of the 19th century census returns were destroyed at one time or another, many of them in 1922 when the old Public Record Office, sadly, tragically, went up in smoke. The 1901 and 1911 census records do survive and can be searched for free on the website of the National Archives of Ireland. And it's clear from browsing the census records that much can be found about immigration through the census returns. So, for instance, you'll find information on those who had been maybe born overseas and were now living in Ireland. So, if we take, for instance, this is for the townland of Mean Damph in County Tyrone. It's near Plumbridge in County Tyrone. This is the Kane family. And you'll notice that Dennis and his wife Ellen had been born in County Tyrone, but their two sons and daughter had been born in America. So looks like Dennis and Ellen were originally from County Tyrone, maybe from this very townland, had emigrated to America. Three of their children, their three children had been born in America, and then they had returned to farm in Ireland. And that's the sort of thing you see countless times in the census returns, many, many records like this. To give another one, this is a a family uh, in Thornhill and Curryglass in County Cork. And you'll notice that uh, in the column headed Where Born, and that's a great thing about census returns of 1901, 1911, they record where born. We have the Harrington family, uh, Michael and Hannah, and a son and a daughter. And then we have a widowed daughter, Mary Flynn. She's born in Cork, but her children, she's four children, of whom three were born in Butte, USA, America. Okay, so Butte in Montana. And it notes that her husband, or rather, her status was given as copper miner's widow. Now, Butte, Montana has a very important copper mine. And so it's clear that they were living there for a number of years before Mary and her three children came back to Ireland. And you notice the youngest child, 2 months old, had been born in County Cork. And I thought it would be interesting to see if I could find the record of the birth of that child. So I was able to find that through the Irish genealogy website. So there it is. It's the second entry. So on the 14th of January 1911 at Thornhill, Mary Frances, the daughter of William John Flynn and Mary Flynn, was born. And you'll notice that William's place of residence, I mentioned this already, his place of residence was given as Butte City, USA, and his occupation was given as miner. So sometimes you can find in civil records of birth information like this, and by working between census records and civil records and other records, you can build up a profile of particular families. There's just a very unusual one. This is for somebody in Dublin in 1911, Frank White, who's age 62. He's described as a superintendent of artisans' dwellings. And where born, it says Rochester, state of New York, USA. And actually says that he had been resident in Ireland since March 1886. Now, that's very unusual. Don't think you're going to find information like that as precise as that, but still it shows you the sort of thing that sometimes you can find in census returns. Now, although virtually all 19th century census returns were lost, destroyed at one time or another, there are some surviving returns for, say, for 1841, 51, and a few others for the other years as well. Some original returns, 1821, 1831 in the case of County Londonderry alone. The 1841 and 51 census returns included on the census form a space for those who were, you might say, normally resident in the family home, but who on the night of the census were absent. And on those forms, you can sometimes find information about people who were members of the family, but who were living elsewhere. So this is for the Cummins family in the town of Ahanamoney, in County Antrim and Ballinderry parish in 1851. And so we've three sisters, all described as servants, and it gives where they were then living. So one, Charlotte, was in America, and Eliza and Ellen were both in England. And information like this is really, really good. Unfortunately, it was not used, say, in the 1901 or 1911 census, but it's really marvelous where it does survive. And so these records are accessible through the National Archives of Ireland website. So useful for you in terms of research. Okay, testamentary papers. So you'll be well aware of the importance of wills in helping us to build up a profile of our ancestors, whether immigrants or not. Prior to 1858, the Church of Ireland, the established church in Ireland at that time, was responsible for testamentary matters. And then from 1858 onwards, the state took over probate matters, and a network of probate registries was established across Ireland. will calendars were printed annually, listing details of testators or those for whom letters of administration had been granted, whose estates letters of administration had been granted. And these give details such as when the person died, where they were resident. It gives a name, it gives their occupation, it gives the date of a probate or administration, it gives the names of executors or the person to whom administration was granted. And even with these in these will calendars, you can find information about emigrants. So I've highlighted one on the screen, Michael Toohey, and this is from 1890, letters of administration of the personal estate of Michael Toohey, late of Wellington, New Zealand, a workman who died on the 15th of January 1890 at the same place, were granted at the principal registry, that was in Dublin, to Winifred Toohey of Iverstown, 6 Mile Bridge, County Clare, widow, the mother. Okay, so he had died in New Zealand, but letters of administration relating to his estate were granted to his mother back in County Clare, although his effects were valued at simply £21. So even through the will calendars, you can sometimes find very useful clues as far as immigrants are concerned. I pulled up this one actually. This is from the Public Record Office database of will calendars for the northern registries. And this is from, this concerns rather George Scott. Describes George Scott, late of Ballina-Cross, in the county of Londonderry, farmer who died on the 28th of December 1839 at Ballina-Cross. Now, interestingly, although he died in 1839, probate was not granted until 1860. Okay, so over 20 years passed between his date of death and the grant of probate. And again, we can only speculate as to why that might have been the case. Now, you'll notice there's a little highlighted link, says image, and if you click on image, it takes you to a scanned copy of that will. So here we have transcript of the will. You see, although the original will was destroyed in Dublin in 1922, transcripts of the wills were made by the local district registries, and these transcripts survive today in either Prony or the National Archives in Dublin. So don't despair at the fact that original wills were destroyed. Transcripts do survive from 1858 onward. So it's why this is so interesting and why I use it as an example is the fact that he refers to his property in the townland of Ballina-Cross, which is near Mahara in County Londonderry. And he says, which I occupy and am justly entitled to by a power of attorney transmitted to me by George Scott of the township of Truro in the province of Nova Scotia, bearing date the 2nd day of December, 1774. So there is somebody who's in Ballina-Cross, and he's and you actually entitled him to occupy that particular farm. It's a power of attorney transmitted to him by somebody in Nova Scotia, dated 1774. So not only is there a very useful in a chronological sense, but there's also a reference to a namesake who's on the other side of the Atlantic. So that's why wills can be so useful. They can connect families in different parts of the world. And even if your ancestor didn't leave a will, maybe, just maybe, a neighbour in the same townland made a will in which say a bequest is left to one of your family members who may be in another part of the world. Now, prior to 1858, prior to the state assuming responsibility for testamentary affairs, sadly, nearly all wills were destroyed. However, we do have some surviving will books, and we do have various abstracts and extracts of surviving wills. So, fortunately, from the 1850s, we have the will books and administration books for the Diocese of Down and Connor, which occupies nearly all of County Antrim and a large part of County Down. So here's an administration that's interesting for a number of reasons. Excuse me, administration concerns George Atkinson Hurrah, formerly of Hillsborough, which is County Down, gentleman deceased, intestate, but late of Gaspé in Lower Canada. That would seem to be Gaspé in Quebec. Uh, Having goods and chattels in the Diocese of Down and Connor and not elsewhere in Ireland. Administration of his effects granted to Arthur Hill Farah of Hillsborough, the paternal uncle of blank Farah, the only child of deceased, whose name is not known, but who is at present in Australia during the absence of the said child from Ireland. So there obviously is one brother has gone to Canada. He's a brother back home in County Down. The brother's gone to Canada, has a son, they think, who is in Australia, but they don't even know enough about him to know what his first name is. And so in some ways it encapsulates the complexity of the emigration story in terms of how families maintain contact and continue to keep relationship going despite the distance between where they were living. Now, gravestone inscriptions, be well aware that gravestone inscriptions are tremendous for a wide variety of reasons. I mean, they give us dates of death, they give us place of residence, they give us family connections, but they also can reveal just how much emigration impacted upon families in Ireland. So here's a headstone from the graveyard adjoining Down Cathedral at Downpatrick in County Down. And so it's the Frizzell family. William Frizzell, born in Strabane, 1822, died at Belfast, 1903. And then the mother of his wife, died in 1920 in her 91st year. And then it names their children. So one of their children, Charles, died in Sydney. William died in New York. Thomas died in Hollywood in County Down. Joseph died in London. Samuel died in Johannesburg. Margaret died in Belfast. James died in Sydney. Okay, and then at the very bottom we have Mary Ann died in Bangor and Robert Ernest died in Hollywood. But look at one family and how it's scattered to all parts of the world. And that's not very unusual in terms of the actual experiences of families in Ireland over the course of the 18th and 19th and even 20th centuries. Now, you'll also find tombstones that were erected by family members resident overseas. Family headstones here erected by the children or grandchildren of those who had emigrated. So this is from Ray Mogie in County Donegal's near Manor Cunningham. And the headstone starts off by saying, erected by John Moore on his return from Australia to the memory of his beloved parents, John and Sarah Moore, late of Ballyholey, and then gives details about their dates of death. So the father died in 1826, and then the mother died in 1846. So headstones or tombstones erected by family members overseas. This is another one. This is from Aughall in County Antrim, the old graveyard there. It's the Gore family, and it refers to the fact that at the very bottom it says, erected in grateful memory by their son William Gore of Cape Town, South Africa. So erected by William Gore, but it also gives details of when William Gore himself died. So it says, William Gore, retired Assistant General Manager of the Standard Bank of South Africa, died in 1969, aged 88. So look at the value. Look out for headstones as giving potentially useful information on family members overseas and the continuing relationship with them. Okay, school records. So registers of pupils, enrollment registers of pupils, most of them will date from the late 1860s onwards. Now, you will find some earlier records of enrollment register or earlier examples of enrollment registers, but mainly for the most part, these records date from the late 1860s onwards. They record the names of pupils. Unfortunately, they do not name the parents of the pupils, routinely anyway. They record the occupation of the parents, but not their names. but occasionally you can find little snippets of information that give us more details about people who had maybe emigrated to another part of the world. So this is for Durat National School in County Tyrone. Um, it's in the parish of Donaghadee, between Donamana and Plumbridge, not very far from Mean Damp that I mentioned already. And here we have an example of a child called Bernard Shearer. And I've circled a little bit of information. In 1883, he emigrated to Philadelphia. So there's the notation. Why was he not at school anymore? Well, because his family had emigrated. You can also find information on registers of monitors. Okay, they were typically older pupils who may have thought of going into a teaching profession themselves. So we have records of monitors. This is one for monitors in schools in County Londonderry. And we have an example here of a child, John James McGuinness, who became a monitor in 1849. And there's a note from 1853, gone to a merchant's office in Glasgow. Okay, so teaching was not for him. He wanted to become a merchant. And so he ends up heading to Glasgow. National schools, elementary schools weren't the only type of schools, of course, in the 19th century. You can also have charity schools. In fact, this Vaughan Charity School, the records for it go back to the late 18th century. And they're very detailed in terms of the, you may say, the ultimate destination of children who had been at this charity school. So there we have examples. I've highlighted them. Ellen Wilson, and it notes that she went with her friends to America, July 1847. Or Alice Rennick. She was sent to Australia in May 1849. So charity schools provided opportunities for children from poorer backgrounds. And so in many cases, the children were maybe apprenticed to someone to learn a particular trade, or maybe they returned home and they farmed or, became household servants or whatever. But some of them, certainly a proportion of them, went abroad. And you can find records of that within charity school papers. Now, we also have industrial schools. Industrial schools were also for poorer children. And, as they were later constituted by Act of Parliament, they were particularly for children who it was feared would maybe end up leading a life of crime or indolence if they didn't have an opportunity to learn a particular skill and acquire different skills. So this is for the Gibraltar or the Grampian training ship, which was docked off Belfast in Belfast Lough. And so we have here details of the child, very good details of the child, actually. Hugh McMeekin, who was 11, who was admitted to the training ship in 1881. Why was he admitted? Well, he was found frequenting the company of reputed thieves. And we have a note that he was discharged in 1883, and it notes to emigrate to Philadelphia. So information like that can be found within the records of industrial schools. That the originals of these records are in Prony. And just another example, this is Joseph Phoenix, who was from Lurgan. And he actually did extremely well for himself. There's a note that after he left the training ship, he went off to another part of the world. In 1887, I think that is, the training ship received a letter that he was in Canada on a steamboat. And then there's a note from 1893 that he visited the training ship. He was doing very well, and he had acquired a fortune trading in Oregon. So there we have an example of where, it did actually work out quite well for them being admitted to the training ship. They learned skills, and then they had opportunities to put those skills to good use wherever they ended up. Okay, records of boards of guardians. The Poor Law was introduced to Ireland in 1838. It was designed to support the destitute through the raising of local taxes or rates And as a result of that, Ireland was divided into a network of poor law unions. And at the centre, roughly speaking, of each of these poor law unions was a workhouse. The records of the boards of guardians are extremely helpful in looking for ancestors for this period. Not only for those who were admitted to the workhouse, but those who engaged with it in one way or another. Maybe as employees, maybe as suppliers of particular goods to the workhouse. And the legislation that established the boards of guardians allowed money to be raised to help people to emigrate if the board of guardians felt that was appropriate. And so here we have an example of an entry in a minute book of a board of guardian. This is for Castlederg. It's from the 28th of April 1848. Notes the guardians being of the opinion that the following orphans are eligible candidates for emigration to Australia. Resolved that the commissioners be requested to apply to the Immigration Office to send one of their officers to inspect them, as the guardians will be prepared to provide the necessary outfit to each person selected and pay the expense of their transit to the port of embarkation. So we have the name of the child, name of the orphan. It gives their ages. You can see where their relationship to each other. So sisters, 3 McCrossan sisters, for example, aged between 15 and 19 are identified. Now, the best known of the schemes to carry orphans to Australia was the Earl Grey scheme, and some marvellous work on that has been carried out by Trevor McLaughlin. And he's published 2 books with the title Barefoot and Pregnant Irish Famine Orphans in Australia. And he also has an excellent website, which is on the screen as well. So Trevor McLaughlin's work on this is really excellent and gives a very vivid insight into the background and the processes and the experiences of those who were part of this scheme. So consider workhouse records or board of guardians records as potentially having information on those who were assisted to emigrate in the course, well, particularly in the 1840s period. That's when they're particularly useful. Okay, newspapers can also be extremely helpful, as I'm sure you're aware, in tracing ancestors. From the 18th century, although there are no, you might say, lists of passengers as such, you will sometimes find information on those who were on ships going to America, who issued, you might say, a declaration thanking the captain for his good conduct towards them. And then that will be followed by a list of the names of the passengers who had subscribed towards that. So the Belfast newsletter, which began publication in 1737, includes a number of these declarations. So this is one from the passengers on board a ship called the Philadelphia, which was sailing between Belfast and Philadelphia, and it thanks the captain, James Malcolm, for his good conduct towards them. So although it's, you might say, it's only a list of names, it doesn't give us places of residence or places of origin in Ireland, but still it's a listing of names of the passengers on board this ship. And this declaration was drawn up in Delaware Bay on the 4th of July, 1771. Now you can get access, or well, I will mention in a moment where you can get access to the newsletter, but on other newspapers. But there is an online index to the newsletter hosted by the University of Louisiana website. It's on the screen, the link, and it's an index to all surviving issues between 1738 and 1800. It runs to some 300,000 entries. It's a very, very useful source of information. You know, I could talk at length about newspapers, but I'll just mention this particular feature that appeared in the Belfast Weekly News from 1890 onwards. It was a column headed Missing Friends. And it allowed people in Belfast or Greater Belfast to place, you might say, an appeal in the newspaper for information on a family member who had gone overseas. So it'll name the person. It'll maybe say when they were last heard of, where they were last known to be living, maybe gives their occupations, gives the name of the person who was making the appeal, and gives their own address. So, I mean, take the top on the right-hand side. McKenna wanted information regarding Charles J. McKenna, cabinet maker. Last heard from about 2 years ago. He was then living well, was in Boston, Massachusetts. Any information will be thankfully received by his aunt, Catherine Silvey, who's in Greencastle near Belfast. And in some cases, the emigrants left quite some time before that. So, information, the next one, McMurray, information wanted regarding David Totten McMurray, who left Belfast in 1856, was last heard of on the 2nd of December 1856, so nearly 40 years earlier, when he was in Quebec. He was then about to commence to study for the ministry. Any information will be thankfully received by Ellen Nixon, maiden name Ellen Ward Totten, who's actually in Glasgow. So she's in Glasgow and making this particular appeal. So this feature continued for many years, but newspapers in general, we know the value of them for information on our ancestors. And where you can get access to newspapers, and this has transformed genealogical research for many people, is through the British Newspaper Archive is one source, and then the Irish News Archive is another. And both of them have large collections of Irish newspapers published in Ireland, including many local newspapers that carried, you might say, obviously more local news. And it really has transformed genealogical research, the greater access to newspapers. No longer having to go through microfilms or hard copies, you can now do searches through these resources. So I think that I will stop sharing at this point and hand back to you, Fintan.
Okay, that was a wonderful session. Thank you very much. Sorry, we were just trying to continue to put other links into the feeds, the chat feed. So I don't know, William, it is a very big audience and it would be invidious to, and also very difficult practically to open it up to the floor. But Gillian, were there any questions that come up in the chat that maybe William could answer? Or
there's just a couple. Most of the questions were quite specific about links or about dates, so we've answered those just in the chat. But a couple of the questions, William, this was a question we got a couple of times in the chat, basically asking, are there passenger lists between Britain and Ireland, people moving over to Scotland and England from Ireland, or vice versa?
No, I don't think so. I'm not aware certainly of any from Ulster ports. Remember, although in a sense, yes, people were emigrating in the sense that they were leaving their home place for somewhere else, but because Britain and Ireland were part of the United Kingdom throughout the 19th century up until all of Ireland, Britain part of the United Kingdom up until 1921, it wasn't as if they had to pass through, you might say, like what we would now consider passport control or whatever. It was simply that a regular flow of people back and forth. So I'm not aware of any records, say passenger records. Okay. Now, having said that, occasionally you will find, the odd record. So around 1798, when there was the rebellion in Ireland, there are some lists of names of passengers arriving in English ports, but they were drawn up for a very specific reason because of concerns about what was happening in Ireland. But routine records of passengers, certainly from Ulster ports, I'm not aware of anything like that.
Great, thank you. And then there's one, it's quite specific, but it says, what records would I look at to find an ancestor who was sentenced to death, but it was changed to deportation to America for life through intervention of a sponsor?
If it's transportation to America, it must have happened before 1775, 76, I think. So court records for that time are quite rare, very extremely rare. I suppose the only possibility would be if there might be, say, a newspaper story about it, something like that. I mean, potentially there could be if there's correspondence surviving from the within a landed estate collection. Maybe there's something like that. Maybe there's no, you know, the family might have appealed to the landlord to intervene to secure clemency. But otherwise, it's very difficult because the actual court records, the assize records, uh, just don't survive, unfortunately.
Okay.
If I could add to that, William, where the person should go in it, as you say, if it's before American independence, then it's going to be very early and very difficult. But for the 19th century, anybody interested in that, court records, but particularly the appeals, etc., on behalf of individuals, and actual records related to sentences passed, that material is in the National Archives in Dublin. It's not digitized, but it's fabulously detailed and interesting. If you get a chance or planning a trip to Ireland, that's where you would look for information about individuals who were transported after having been convicted of a crime. And you do indeed see many appeals for clemency, or somebody speaking up for them. This person had a simple fall. He's of a good family. One of the funniest ones I remember reading was somebody appealed that her boys would not be transported to Australia because they were needed for the potato harvest, and I thought, how Irish is that? But National Archives for that material is where you want to go to. Because William covered an awful lot of ground today, and there's a lot of little, as you can see, little tips and techniques that he mentioned. So what I want to just mention to everybody are some resources that we have. So if you're interested in the subject of migration, as in migration from Ireland, yes. So if you go to the browse, this is the Foundation's, I'll just go back home. So if you just go to the Foundation's website, if you go to shop, if you then go to browse, and in the second column, you can see migration studies, and then you can see these various guides that we have. Some of them, one of our earliest books published was Ulster Immigration to Colonial America, and it's still in print after 50 years. It's a fabulous book, but there's many others, but migration to Canada, migration to Australia, New Zealand, and also even one not directly related to migration as such, but actually relates to South Africa. So that's if you're interested in book about migration. But also I wanted to mention in just under genealogy guides that if you are interested in taking advantage of the tips that William gave you today, I would strongly recommend everybody, if you don't own a copy of this book, and you can buy it as an ebook, so you don't have to incur postage, is William's guide, Researching Scots Irish Ancestors, the Essential Genealogical Guide to Early Modern Ulster, 1600 to 1800. That is a superb book and has been lauded by the whole research community as being a wonderful resource. And a superb companion to that, and we say that because Gillian and I have read most of it, so we know, is another superb book that's about to be published by William. You can pre-order now, and that is a complement and companion volume, Researching Ulster Ancestors, 1800 to 1914. So he's delving into these different record collections in the archives in Ireland with research tips and comments that will be of help to you in relation to the subject that he was discussing today. And just finally to mention, because some of you were asking about services, the Foundation has been offering research services since 1957. So we are very experienced at providing research if you've got a query, a genealogical query you want to solve, and we have many different forms of research that we can offer you. Face-to-face consultation, which could be a virtual consultation if you're not visiting Ireland, a family history survey, which is a preliminary assessment of what you have and what the chances of being able to find information, i.e. if there are no records there for that family, it's going to be very hard to do much research. A full family history report or specific research if you're saying, well, I know those records are in D448 in the Prony collection, I just need somebody to go and look at it. We also, if you're coming to Ireland and want to have one-to-one assisted archival research, we can facilitate that. We also do proof of Irish citizenship, so we help you get the detail that you need. We don't do the process for you. You have to do that through the Irish government's website. We will document retrieval if you say, look, I know that will survives in that Prony collection there. Could you get it? Could you photograph it? And then send that to me. We also have courses that we run, genealogical conferences that you could participate in, where you could come to with 3 events taking place this year, where you could spend the time researching along with other like-minded individuals with our whole team in the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland. And on one of them, the September event, we actually have touring and research. Okay, well, that's us finished now. So we hope you enjoyed the session this afternoon, and just look out for other presentations that will be coming up from the foundation in the months ahead.